Rahu and Ketu, these are the most important things in the horoscope. Most of what that's really important that's going to happen in your life, or that makes things happen in your life, is going to happen along the Rahu-Ketu path. So it's critical that every astrologer understands how to use Rahu and Ketu and how to read them correctly. You know, most people that come into your office for a reading, if you can just talk about Rahu and Ketu thoroughly, you're going to answer most of the very difficult situations in their life, meaning the things that really perplex them. If you can handle Rahu and Ketu right, you're going to sort those things out for them. They're by far the single most important things to understand. And at the same time, they're the most confused things to understand for a couple of reasons. There's the least amount of information on them, and a lot of the information on them is simply wrong. So we have to start at the very bottom, or very beginning of Rahu and Ketu if we want to understand them, and really see what information is really out there about them, and really understand what they really are before we can start bringing them into interpretation. You know, Rahu and Ketu are traditionally not used in Western astrology. Rahu and Ketu are traditionally not used even in some parts of Hindu astrology. In fact, Brihad Jataka, which is the famous book written by Varaha Mihira, he doesn't consider Rahu and Ketu anywhere in his book. He just doesn't use them. In his Brihad Samhita book, I believe, or maybe his book on his astronomy book for calculating eclipses, he uses them. But he doesn't use them anywhere else. So Rahu and Ketu are so important, but they've been ignored by a lot of astrological traditions. The reason for that is that Rahu and Ketu are not planets. Okay? When you look up there in the sky, you're not going to see them. Now, they are grahas, though. You know that Sanskrit word, graha. Graha means to capture or to seize. And in astrology, anything that lays a hold on you and yokes you or attaches you to the fruits of your karmas is a graha. Okay? And those are the 7 planets, or the 5 planets, the sun and the moon, and Rahu and Ketu. They're all grahas. So they all have a predictive effect of dictating the fated events in your life. But Rahu and Ketu are not planets. They're no more planets than the Lagna is. And we know the Lagna is not a planet. We know it's important, but we know it's not a planet. Rahu and Ketu are similar. They're no more planets than the Lagna is, but they're equally, well, more important really. So what are these guys really? Well, astronomically, let's take a look. We've got the sun, and around the sun, we have got the Earth, cruising around the sun. So we're going to put Earth right here. And around the Earth, we have the moon. Okay? And we have the, where this plane of the moon rotates around the Earth, that's inclined at a 5.9 degree inclination to the circle of the Earth going around the sun. So here we've got, it's easier to see it in 3D, here we've got the plane of the Earth rotating around the sun. So the sun's in the middle, and the Earth's revolving around here. We have this plane. And say this little finger here is Earth. Well, around Earth we have the moon. But the moon doesn't rotate around the Earth this way, at the same plane as this. It rotates it at a 5.9 degree angle. So it's intersecting that plane like this. And as it rotates, here's the plane where it intersects. As the moon moves from, say, here, and is moving south, where it crosses this plane, again, planes always extend into infinity, where the moon crosses this plane is Ketu. So hard to draw from this angle. Is Ketu. And then the sun is in the north, meaning it's south of the ecliptic plane. And then the sun, or the moon, as it moves up here, as it crosses the ecliptic plane again on its movement north, that's called Rahu. So the 2 points where the moon crosses the ecliptic plane, which is that plane of the Earth revolving around the sun, when the sun moves south of that plane, the point it crosses that southern point is Ketu, meaning the point it hits starts going south, and the point it crosses it as it's moving north is Rahu. So it's, again, this is true all the way south, and this is all the way north. But this is where the moon is traveling south, going in the southern direction, and crosses that plane as Ketu. And here the moon is traveling north, and when it crosses the ecliptic plane, that is Rahu. So really, it's just the intersection of the Earth's plane around the sun with that intersection to the moon's plane around the Earth, which creates Rahu and Ketu. So Rahu and Ketu are really simply an intersection of two planes. Okay? Now, that's exactly what the Lagna is, just to get an idea. Here we have the Earth. Okay? And here we have the zodiac around the Earth. And Earth has a center point. It's right there in the middle. The Earth has a center point. And the surface of the Earth is revolving around the middle of the Earth, right? So if you take a ball and spin it, the edges of the ball, the surface of the ball is spinning around the center of the ball. That's what's happening with Earth. And where we're at on the surface of that ball called Earth determines our horizon. Okay? And the east point of that horizon will be the Lagna, the ascendant, and the west point of that horizon will be the descendant, or the 7th house cusp. So the Lagna and 7th house cusp are the intersection of the Earth's surface around its center with the ecliptic. Okay? And what Rahu and Ketu are, they're simply the intersection of the moon rotating around the Earth with the ecliptic, instead of the surface of the Earth rotating around the center of the Earth. So the difference between the ascendant and 7th house, the difference between the Lagna 7th and the Rahu and Ketu are simply that it's the movement of the Earth's surface around its center that determines the Lagna and 7th, and it's the movement of the moon around the Earth that determines Rahu and Ketu. But it's the same type of thing. It's an intersection of two planes. We're just dealing with different planes. With the ascendant, we're dealing with the horizon plane, which is determined by where you're at on the surface of the Earth. And with Rahu and Ketu, it's determined by the moon. But it's just it's a plane created by something else, but it's exactly the same type of intersection, okay, that we have. It's an intersection with the ecliptic. So that tells us a lot about Rahu and Ketu right there. Now, what's the difference between the two? Well, we know from studying astrology that the ascendant is your path. And so is the 7th house. The first 7th house, that line through the horoscope, is the path that you're on this lifetime. Jaimini uses the 7th house as significantly as the ascendant for many things, because it's the path that you're on. More specifically, it's the path of your Deha. Deha means your body. Why is it the path of your Deha? Because it's determined by the Earth and its intersection, its horizon intersection with the ecliptic. And the Earth is the body. The Earth symbolizes the body. So, the Sun in 7th house is the path of your body. Where your Lagna Lord is, like say what house your Lagna Lord is a house that your body will be spending lots of time with. Okay? This Rahu and Ketu, however, represent a path, because they're created by an intersection of two planes, but they represent the path of consciousness. Why consciousness? Because it's the moon that gives us self-consciousness. Okay? So whereas the first 7th house axis represents the path that your body's taking, and along that path you're going to meet all the things that you're going to meet. You're walking down that path and you meet a great job or a terrible job. You're walking down that path and you meet a wonderful woman or a terrible woman. You're walking down that path and you have kids, or maybe you walk by that path and babysit your sister's kids, whatever. But everything happens along that path determined by your ascendant, 7th house. And it puts your body in the places that your body needs to be to burn the fruits of its karmas. And through that one becomes free of body consciousness. Now, because we burn the karma and we finish it. The path of the consciousness of the moon, this is where consciousness is evolving now. Okay? Rahu and Ketu represent the path that our consciousness needs to take to evolve. Okay? And because of that, it's the most important thing in the horoscope. Because when we come to the astrologer and we're out of whack and our life sucks and everything's going wrong and we don't understand things, it's our consciousness that's disturbed. Life doesn't feel right. I'm a mess. I don't understand this. I'm hurting here. I'm feeling empty. My consciousness is in disrepair, is basically what's happening. Well, our consciousness is going to be disrepaired along the Ketu Rahu axis, because that's the path the consciousness is traveling to evolve and develop. Okay? So, in any horoscope, if anyone wrote and got a book, said, I'm going to write a story of my life, and they wanted to write a book on, truly about their life, a true autobiography, then a lot of the majority of the important things that happen in that book are going to have to do with the place where Ketu and Rahu is. The bhavas where Ketu and Rahu are affecting. That's really what most of that book is going to revolve around in. And the areas that the turning points, the most critical things that happen to that person, where they have the greatest hopes and the greatest despair, are going to happen in the context of that Ketu Rahu axis. Okay? And if it doesn't, you can be sure they left a big part of their biography out, probably due to embarrassment. Because one thing Ketu and Rahu like to do is they like to embarrass us and make us have all kinds of low self-esteem. Okay? Because it's a difficult path that they represent. And because of that, Rahu and Ketu are considered cruel planets. They make life hard. The growth of consciousness, which happens along the path of consciousness, the path of Ketu and Rahu, is going to be a difficult one. Okay? Perhaps rewarding, though, if Rahu and Ketu are well situated. So that's what these guys are astronomically. So Ketu is sort of like a lagna. Or look at it this way. The first house is your body. It's what you're born with, it's you, and it's what you're familiar with. The seventh house in the horoscope is the house of Kama, the desire house. It's what you don't have, it's what you crave, it's what you want. Okay? Ketu and Rahu are the same thing. Ketu represents what you have, what's natural to you, meaning what your consciousness has, what's natural to your consciousness, the natural way of your consciousness to be, the way it's easy for your consciousness to be. Rahu represents what your consciousness doesn't have. Okay? What your consciousness is craving and needing and desiring. Okay? Just like the first seventh house. So Ketu is kind of like the first house, and Rahu is sort of like the seventh house. Okay? Now, anytime you deal with anything to do with something written in the Sanskrit language, a good place to always start is not in all the results that the old books give, most of which is just confusing and useless and talks about elephants and all kinds of weird things that you're never going to have to deal with, is simply going to the name of the thing. So, we have names, several Sanskrit names. This is, Graha Sutras, you can read this. I just want to make sure I don't forget any of the names, so I have in front of me here. So, we want to understand the meaning of the names, of everything we do in Vedic astrology. First thing you want to know is, what's that name mean? And after you've contemplated and got the meaning after that, then you're ready to start reading, yogas and things that will make no sense, okay? But it's the name that's critical when we're dealing with Sanskrit. So Ketu has several names. Ketu is his most common name. Ketu simply means flag. His other common name, Dwaja, also means a flag. So Ketu is the flag in the horoscope. And what does a flag represent? A flag represents the territory that we have conquered. So when the king comes in and conquers territory and he secures it and he says, all right, this is mine, he sticks his flag in it. He sticks his standard in it. And that way everyone knows this belongs to that king and he's the lord of that region. That's what Ketu is in your chart. It's the territory that you've conquered, and it's the region where you're lord. Meaning it's the region where you're most capable of. You're good at that thing and it's natural to you. And because it's something you've conquered, it's something that gives you security. Okay? In Brihad Parashara, when Parashar talks about the different things that different planets rule, like, the sun is the king and so on, Rahu and Ketu represent the planetary army. Okay? Ketu is that army that protects the homeland, that protects the territory where the flag is. Rahu represents the army that marches into the unknown country to wage war, rape and pillage, and come back with goods. Okay, and to expand the territories. But that secure territory where everything is safe, where everything is tight-knit, where there's patrols and policemen, and where it's safe to go out, that's Ketu. So in your horoscope, Ketu is where you go to safety. When you go out in the world and get beat up by Rahu, Ketu is always where you come back for safety, protection, and rest. Because that's your conquered, safe, regulated, secure area. Okay? So Ketu means flag, and he means, Dwaja means flag. Another name for Ketu is Duma, which means smoky, misty, and Dumra, which means smoky, dim. So Ketu has these two names that give it a bit of a clouded effect where everything's not totally clear. Okay? But it's not black. Ketu, like Rahu's name is black. One of his names basically translates into darkness. You can't see a thing. Well, Ketu is a little misty. What is mist? Well, mist means you just can't see that far. When things are a little hazy or a little misty, you can't see that far. And that's the problem with Ketu. He's not that far-sighted. He can't really see what's beyond his own walls. So he got his little secure territory, and he's feeling safe in there, and everything in that territory, because it's up close, looks pretty solid. But when he looks out a little further, he can't. It's misty. So Ketu doesn't have a far-reaching vision. He does create some mist of us being unable to see beyond our own security paradigm. So if a person has Ketu in the second house, their security paradigm is, in order to have a safe and successful life, I have to be completely self-sufficient and completely self-resourceful. And the minute he has that concept, he'll be super resourceful. But that security paradigm where he's experienced security is going to limit him to where Rahu is, the 8th house, other people's money, the good that other people can do to them, the benefits he can get from other people. And so his life will be a little clouded. It won't be as expansive as it could be. So and it shuts him down to the possibilities that there's other people with resources and abilities that could benefit me. Because Ketu's in this little world of, I'm resourceful, my abilities, that's what's going to get me through life. And my resources. And that strong Ketu concept miss the other possibilities, which means there's a whole world of people to benefit from outside of yourself. Okay? So Ketu gives that miss because he makes us short-sighted, because we're so focused on the Ketu thing that we can't see beyond that concept. Because like in the mist, you can see 10 feet in front of you, and so you think that's all there is in life, but there's a whole other world past that. But the good thing with Ketu, it's misty. You can see for a short distance, and so you have something you can count on and you can trust. But it's going to be something that's limiting compared to what's around you in the whole entire world. Okay? Another name for Ketu is Pucha, which means tail. The reason he's called that, because when we're going to talk about in a minute, when Ketu gets created, he's a demon that gets cut in half, and he represents the tail part. Okay, we'll talk about that more when we get to that myth. The other name is Shiki, which means pointed flame, and Anala, which means fire. The reason he has those names is because Ketu is considered to be a comet. Okay? And comets are all thought to have been born of Ketu. So anytime you see a comet in the sky, that comet is considered to be born through Ketu. In fact, comets as a whole, all the comets in the world are called Ketus. A comet is called a Ketu. And they're considered to have been born through Ketu. Since comets look like a streak of fire and have that fiery tail, one of the names of Ketu is, pointed flame, Shiki, and also Anala, which means fire, because it looks like that fire in the sky. Now, the interesting thing about those names is that fire is something that consumes everything to the point that it consumes itself. Right? And that's a critical thing about fire. The fire consumes what it's consuming but in so doing so, it consumes itself in the end. Okay? It burns out. And Ketu is exactly the same way. Wherever you have Ketu in the chart, you'll be strong there, you'll be fiery there, you'll be passionate there. You'll have that fire. But it's just a matter of time before that fire gets burnt out. So if you've got Ketu in the second house, you'll be super self-sufficient, super self-resourceful, but there's going to come a time in every Ketu in the second house person's life where they feel totally burnt out with having to do everything for themselves and by themselves and with themselves, meaning they'll be totally burnt out of being self-sufficient. Okay? The flame will die. It will burn out. Okay? And because of that, Ketu represents this concept of completion. There's a time when things get completed. I need to move past them. And Ketu is the significator of completions. So those are the simple names of Ketu. We want to keep those in mind. Now Rahu, his name, Rahu, the popular name we use, simply means seizure, or Caesar. Not like the king of Rome, but as something that seizes you and grabs you and jerks you around. That's what Rahu is. He's a Caesar, and he really is. He's really the one that seizes us. How can you get the feeling of this quality? Find somebody, if you're a man, find a woman whose Lagna, Lord, or moon falls right smack dab on your Rahu. And that woman will seize you. You'll get pulled in her direction. And if you're a woman, find a man whose sun, ascendant, or ascendant lord falls right on your north node. And that man is going to seize you. So that's what I mean by Rahu being a Caesar. Meaning it grabs us and against our very volition makes us want something or do something that we are powerless to ignore. Okay? He seizes us, and through that Rahu drags us into more mischief than any other planet in the chart. Okay? He's the Caesar. One of his other very important names is Vidum Tuda, which means the moon troubler. Now, astronomically, eclipses can happen at Ketu or Rahu. A lunar eclipse can happen at Ketu and Rahu, or a solar eclipse can happen at Ketu or Rahu. But still, it's Rahu that's given the name moon troubler. Ketu doesn't get that name. Okay? Now, remember what I said. Rahu and Ketu represent the path of our consciousness. Ketu represents where our consciousness has developed and found security, the flag in the territory. Rahu represents the unknown where we haven't developed any security, and it's the path of consciousness. And what happens if you stick Rahu on top of the moon? Now the moon becomes part of the path that hasn't been developed. And the moon is the consciousness to begin with. So Rahu-moon conjunctions are so very, very difficult. It's possibly the most difficult conjunction you're going to have astronomically, is a Rahu-moon conjunction. Because the path of consciousness is requiring the development of the consciousness. Where Rahu is where it's undeveloped, and what's undeveloped? The moon, which is the consciousness. So Rahu-moon people have such a very, very difficult time relating to the world in a normal way. Okay? Now Raman hated Rahu-moon conjunctions. He would just say, if you got Rahu-moon conjunct, you're mentally ill. Okay? Well, luckily it's not that bad. But when you've got Rahu-moon conjunction, you're definitely going to be mentally peculiar, which means you're going to be a strange bird somehow. Okay? And that's not always a bad thing. You'll see some amazing Rahu-moon people there. But Rahu-moon people are developing the moon. They're developing the moon, the very thing that creates Rahu and Ketu. So you can imagine the challenges of that. Okay? So Rahu-moon is a difficult, painful conjunction. And because of that, Rahu's given the word moon troubler. Moon with Ketu is a serious introvert that doesn't want to share its feelings with anyone to the point that it's crying in pain and nobody knows. That's easy compared to Rahu-moon conjunction. So we'll talk about that more when we get into the planets conjuncting the nodes. But Rahu-moon is definitely the most serious nodal conjunction you're going to have. Okay. Rahu also is known as Agus, which means without rays, Agus, without rays, because he's dark, and as Tama, which means darkness, because he's completely dark. So Ketu, we're told, has a name of misty. We can see for a while. We can see what's close to us, what's ours, but we can't see beyond that to the other possibilities. But Rahu's just dark. He's not given any light. You can't see a thing where Rahu is. So it comes to where Rahu is, simply put, you're going to be in the dark. Whatever house Rahu's in, you're in the dark, and you're going to be in the dark to a huge degree until Rahu matures, which isn't going to happen until that old age of 42. So Rahu, where Rahu is, lights are out, and you're going to be fumbling around in the dark. So you know how it's like walking through a house with, the blindfold? That's the house Rahu's in. Okay? It's dark. Now Rahu is considered to be serpentine. He has lots of snake names. Sarpa, Fani, Bhujanga, Bhujaga, and Ahi. All which means serpent, basically. Okay? So he's a snake. And snake symbolizes transmutation. Okay? Wherever Rahu is, there's always going to be a great need for transmutation. What is transmutation? That's having one desire and transmuting it to something that can be fulfilled. Rahu always awakens needs and desires that, simply put, you can't find complete fulfillment with on earth. And as a result, you're going to have to transmute some of those desires. Okay, so transmutation is just part of Rahu. Snakes also symbolize sexual energy. That's right, Rahu is the one that, if you've got sexual combinations in your chart and Rahu gets involved, that's when you get extreme sexual situations or combinations, okay? Rahu definitely sexes up things. Okay. Another one of his names of Rahu is Gata, which means destruction, and Pata, which means falling. Pretty tough names. Well, with Gata being destruction being Rahu's name, that's right. Where Rahu is out, you're going to enjoy destruction. In fact, the general rule in astrology is Rahu Dasha, in the beginning of his Dasha, in Rahu, is going to destroy the house he's in. And that almost always happens with 90% certainty. Except, the only exception to that rule is, well, you might have a great Rahu that's actually not going to destroy that house, but it's certainly going to create a lot of stress in that house at best. But when Rahu's in the 10th house, in Rahu, he raises you to position. But in any other house, he ruins it. But in 10th house, Rahu doesn't ruin your career. He actually gives you success. But in every other house, Rahu will cause you huge trouble in the beginning of his dasha. That's like the awakening. Boom, Rahu, I'm here to wreak havoc in your life until you sort it out. The other thing is about Rahu has the capacity to destroy us. Okay? Rahu can create such needs that those needs remaining unfulfilled can cause us to destroy ourselves. So that means, yes, they are important in suicide-type combinations. And also which will cause us to destroy other parts of our lives. So where Rahu is, there could come a time in life where we'll do anything to get that house that Rahu's in, even if that means ruining the rest of our lives. Now that's a bad Rahu. A good Rahu will be able to balance that a little bit. But Rahu has that capacity to ruin everything in your life for the sake of the thing that Rahu's focused on, while at the same time there's going to be a time when Rahu's going to destroy the very thing it wants so much. So you bet, we have destruction. Other important name of Rahu is Pata. Pata means falling. Okay? One of the problems with Rahu is we almost always settle for less than we can dream of where that house is. Why? Because Rahu has a vivid imagination. Okay? So one of the elements of falling with Rahu is we always fail to realize our full potential in that area where Rahu is. So there's always going to be an element of us having a fall from our true potential. But also Rahu can literally cause that. It can cause falls from position, falls from heights, falls from social status, falls in happiness. It can drop you to your lowest low. And when you meet someone and they're in their most depressed day of their life, they say, this is the worst, most depressing period of my life. Well, when they're that low, probably Rahu is the planet that made them fall that low. So you start by looking at Rahu. Okay? So that you can get an idea, these planets can be pretty serious. Okay? Now, the important thing to remember about Rahu and Ketu is that these two planets, you can't affect them alone. You just can't do one without the other. They're a pair. They're both ends, the different ends of the same path. Rahu's here. When the moon crosses the ecliptic as the moon goes this way. And Ketu's here as the moon goes south of the ecliptic. And they're always exactly opposite each other. You can't affect one without affecting the other. Okay? Look at it this way. Look at your 7th house in the horoscope. Here's your 7th house. First house, you're logged in the horoscope. And here's your 7th. Let's say you dress like a cowboy. When you go out partying or go to the bars, you're going to meet cowgirls, right? It's cowgirls going to look at you. The minute you change your appearance, say you go goth, right? And you go out dressed as a goth person. You get yourself some black clothes, dye your hair black, powder your face, you look like white as hell. Get some tattoos, and you're looking totally gothic. Well, now your 7th house is going to reflect that, and you're going to meet goth girls, right? So you can't change yourself, your body, and where you're going without changing the people you meet. So if you take your body and you go to the gym, you're going to meet people working out. And when you take your body and you go to an astrology conference, you're going to meet people who are doing astrology. So, just as you can't change you or where you are without changing the people you encounter, you can't change Ketu without changing Rahu, and vice versa. Okay? Now, an interesting thing is, we know that Rahu represents foreigners, right? It represents the unknown. One unknown thing, they're foreign people in foreign places. Well, in astrology, in Vedic astrology, and this actually works in practice too, the 7th house represents foreign countries and distant journeys. Isn't that cool? You see the parallels between the 7th house and Rahu? They're so parallel, and there's a huge parallel between Ketu and the Lagna. They're just the same path. One's the path of body, one's the path of mind. Okay, so now we have an idea of what Rahu and Ketu are. We know their names, and we know astronomically how they're created, and we know that they're not planets, but they still have the capacity to seize our consciousness and do deadly things to us, pull us around, especially Rahu. Rahu doesn't give us a clue. It's dark. Ketu lets us see within the scope of our limited paradigm, but not beyond that. So that's some of the information we're going to use as we actually get into using Rahu and Ketu. The other important thing about Rahu and Ketu is the myth. There's 2 important myths revolving around Rahu and Ketu. Okay? We're going to do the simple myth first. Okay, the simple myth is a myth about the Varaha avatar, which is the boar or the pig avatar. So, this avatar, at the beginning of creation, and again, in Hinduism, it's all cycles. Creation comes and then it dissolves, and then it comes again. So at the beginning of creation, the gods were told to create. And then, or what was it, gods, or was the Prajapatis who need to create and build offspring were told to create. And they're going, we can't create. The earth is buried under the water. It's buried in the waters, which symbolizes earth hasn't manifested yet. Okay, earth is in that astral realm still, and it's not physically manifested enough that they can start creating on earth. So they're complaining the earth is buried beneath the waters. How are we going to fill our jobs? So what they always do, the Devas, when they're having problems, they always pray to Vishnu, and they pray to Vishnu as always this time, and Vishnu says, appears to them in his typical form with 4 arms and so on, and he hears their problems, and as he thinks on it, a little thing flies out of his nose, and it's a little boar. And it doesn't have wings, but it's flying around. As it flies around, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it gets huge. Then it dives down beneath the ocean. It picks up the earth on its horns and starts bringing the earth to the surface. While that's happening, a very particular tough and evil Asura attacks Varaha and tries to keep it from lifting the earth. But Varaha Avatar destroys that Asura, and that Asura was actually, one of the incarnations of either Ravana or his brother. There's those two gatekeepers of Vishnu, which were cursed to be born on earth 3 times and to be killed by Vishnu each time. In one incarnation, they were Ravana and his brother, Kumbhakarna, if I remember his name right. And in this particular incarnation, this was one of those incarnations. So Varaha, who was an avatar of Vishnu, an incarnation of Vishnu, kills this particular demon, brings the earth to the surface, and all of the devas and all the, sons of Brahma and everyone starts praising Varaha. And so then Varaha teaches teaches them the rituals for having a good life, for being prosperous and having offspring, all those type of rituals, perpetuatory type things to have a good life on earth, the sacrifices necessary to live a healthy and abundant life, Varaha Avatar teaches to them. Okay? And he's the one who's responsible for bringing earth to the surface where creation can happen. And that's really the most important aspect of that myth, is that all these other planets we have, Sun, Moon, Mars, they're all ruled by devas. And they're all represented by devas that symbolize internal energies. So the Shiva, for instance, represents the internal energy of the yoga, moving the energy along the spine in order to have liberation. And that's something that really is happening within ourselves. And what's happening within ourselves is Shiva's manifesting in a mythological sense. But what it is the energy within ourselves. It's always about ourselves. It's an internal process, is what I'm trying to say. Everything in your chart can be dealt with through an internal process, but not Rahu. Because Rahu gave birth to the avatar that brought the earth to the surface of the waters, meaning out of the consciousness, out of the astral realm, out of the realm of the energy of the chakras, but into physical, concrete reality where the earth can actually be created upon. Where Rahu is in our chart is where we have to get hands-on, practical, taste it, feel it, bite it, and get smashed by it knowledge. You cannot avoid where Rahu is and transmute it internally. You're not meant to. It's the path your consciousness has to take in the physical world. Okay? Now there's a tendency to avoid Rahu in our lives. Okay? In fact, Rahu matures at 42. The first 42 years of our lives, we're actually living a lot more on Ketu. Okay? Meaning Ketu's a huge guiding influence in our life, and we're going to stick to Ketu more. So in the first 42 years, between choosing Ketu over here and Rahu over here, we're going to choose Ketu, unless there's this particular dasha that's forcing us into Rahu. But even if that dasha forces us into Rahu, we're still being Ketu while we're being forced over there. Okay? But when Rahu matures at 42, that's actually when a person really becomes ready to embrace Rahu. Okay? And that means to really get hands-on experience with Rahu and really taste, feel, touch, and get smashed by Rahu. Okay? You cannot work Ketu out in your mind. You cannot work Rahu out in your mind. You have to be brave to work out Rahu in the real world. Okay? But it's usually hard for people to do that. We really don't start working out Rahu in the real world until we approach 42. Okay? When Rahu matures, we're really ready for that. Before that, we're just not completely ready. So you see, it's a long path when we're dealing with mastering Rahu. At 42, we can maybe master it. Before then, no. We might do good at it. If we have a good Rahu, we'll do good at it before we're 42. And we might even look like we mastered it. But no, until we're 42, we're pretty clueless when it comes down to what we're going to learn at 42. So, compare that to Saturn, which matures at 36. You see, Saturn lessons are easy compared to Rahu lessons. Okay? So the most important thing we learn from that myth is Rahu brings the Earth to the surface and teaches us how to master Earth by giving us the rituals to make life happen the way we want to on Earth. That's what Rahu does. We have to approach it tangibly, concretely, in a physical, real-world way, and only then can we master it. And how do we master it? By wisdom and knowledge, which is symbolized by those rituals, by learning, by understanding it. Okay? So wherever Rahu is in your chart where it's causing you grief, go learn about that topic. Okay? If it's in the second house and it's finance, learn everything there is to know about finance, and that will help you. Okay? So that's one myth. That's the short myth. The long and colorful myth has to do with the birth of Rahu and Ketu. And this is one of the more famous stories in the Puranas. So, in the Puranas, the Devas, the angelic forces, are always fighting the Asuras. And what the Asuras are, they're sort of like the Titans in Norse mythology, or the Titans in Greek mythology. You know how the Titans are always fighting the gods in Greek mythology? And in Norse mythology, the gods are always fighting the giants, their big enemies. Okay? Well, in Hinduism, we've got the Devas, the gods, fighting the Asuras. Okay? And but it's the same thing. It's Titans and Asuras are Titans and giants. They're powerful beings, but they don't have the immortality of the gods. Okay? So at the very beginning of time, this myth took place. It's one of the early myths that took place. These two factions, as always, are fighting in the heavens. And at the time, the Devas were actually at risk of losing. They were feeling really threatened. So they prayed to Vishnu, and Vishnu came to them and said, "This is what you need to do. You guys are going to lose. You're outnumbered. There's too many Asuras. They're big and they're powerful. So you're going to lose. So what you need to do, you need to make a temporary peace with the Asuras. And during that peace, I want you to churn the ocean to get the nectar of immortality. And when you have that nectar of immortality, you guys can drink it, and you'll be immortal, and then the Asuras will never be able to beat you." But then Devas go, "Hey, wait a minute. If we work with them to get the nectar of immortality, what if they take the nectar of immortality and drink it? Then we're totally going to be in trouble." Vishnu says, "Don't worry about it. I promise you that I'll arrange things that only you guys get the nectar of immortality, and only you guys become immortal, not the Asuras." So the Devas say, all right. They go over to the Asuras, they call a truce, say, "Hey, let's generate the nectar of immortality. Okay? Let's churn the ocean and get the nectar of immortality." And Vishnu told, when he told this plan, he told the Devas, he said, "Whatever the Asuras ask for, as you churn the ocean, lots of things are going to come up. The last thing will be the nectar of immortality. But before that, all kinds of goodies will come out of the ocean. Whatever it is, if the Asuras want it, let them have it. Don't worry about it. Your only goal is to get the nectar of immortality. Let everything else go to them, if they want it." So the Devas agreed to this. So, they called a truce. The Devas and the Asuras, they go to churn the ocean. To churn the ocean, they have to get Mount Mandara. What's Mount Mandara? Well, here we have Earth. Earth has a north and south pole and the equator. This north pole is considered Mount Mandara. Okay? So the Earth is kind of considered to be this mountain up here where the Mount Mandara is the north pole of Earth. Okay? This is Mount Mandara, the north pole of the Earth. So they said, all right, get the north pole of the Earth, get Mount Mandara. and churn it. Stick it in the ocean and rotate it like you're churning butter. Grind up the ocean until it thickens and things arise out of the ocean. That was their goal. So they take Mount Mandara and they are carrying it and they lug it over to the ocean and they drop it in the ocean. And then they get Vasuki, who is this huge sea serpent, and they tie Vasuki around the Mount Mandara. Then the Devas go over to the head of the snake and hold on to it. And they're waiting for the Asuras to go to the tail of the snake and hold on to it. And then they're going to churn it. They're going to walk around this mountain holding on that snake as a handle, churn it up. But the Asuras say, hey, this isn't cool. You know, we're not going to be at the tail of the snake. You know, that's the low place to be. We want to be the head of the snake. So Devas say, you want the head? You can have the head. So they let them hold on to the head of the snake, and the Devas went to the tail of the snake. Then they start churning. But being Devas and Asuras, somehow they managed still to forget to perpetuate Ganesha. So Mount Mandara sunk, and it wasn't going to work. It was sinking into the ocean. And Vishnu saw that happen, so he quickly was born himself as a small little turtle that swam under Mount Mandara, got really big, and lifted Mount Mandara on, up high enough that they could churn the ocean. And that turtle was called the Kurma, or turtle avatar of Lord Vishnu, which is the avatar that was born through Saturn. So Saturn, the avatar of Saturn, which is Kurma, is an important part of the myth of the creation of Rahu and Ketu. And most of them didn't even notice that Kurma had come on and lifted Mount Mandara. They were totally unaware of it. They didn't see Vishnu do that. And that's just like Saturn. Saturn does all this hard work in the world, without which nothing would get done, but nobody ever notices poor little Saturn. That's what Saturn's in your chart. Where Saturn is, you work so hard and get no recognition. Okay? So that's what the Kurma avatar is doing. So the Devas and the Asuras are churning this Mount Mandara. And as they're churning it, different things pop up. This and this. I don't remember all those things, but the Asuras want all of them. And they go, I want it, I want it. And finally, after lots and lots of toiling, the nectar of immortality pops up. Okay? Now we have the nectar of immortality. Now here's a critical lesson in this myth. Vishnu said, if you want to churn the ocean, you're going to need the help of the Asuras. You can't do it alone. Okay? Now what are the Asuras? The Asuras represent our primal nature. Man has a primal nature. Okay? The Devas represent our divine nature. Man has both a primal and a divine nature. Okay? He has both. And they're constantly at war with each other. Okay? They're constantly at war with each other. But the goal of life is to get the nectar of immortality and become a god. The nectar of immortality is that drop of bliss that gives liberation. Okay, so the nectar of immortality in these myths, that's what you get drunk on. That's the thing that gives you that ecstasy of divine bliss, of spiritual consciousness. Okay, it's in high states of meditation when the hypothalamus starts secreting things that give you joy and bliss. That's the nectar of immortality. So the nectar of immortality is the end-all goal of life. Okay? It's all we're craving. It's all we want here. But the Devas, the divine nature of us, could not go get that all by itself. They needed the help of the Asuras. And in life, it's only by the primal nature of us harmonizing with the divine nature and focusing on the task of liberation together that a person can be liberated. One of the unfortunate things of religions, even Hinduism has done this. If you study Hinduism compared to old Vedic religion, they're very, very different. What all religions have done, Christianity, Hinduism, Muslims, you name it, what all the modern religions of the past 2,000 years have manifested here, because again, the Hinduism of the past 2,000 years is not the Hinduism of 3,000 years ago, is that they've decided to take the divine nature of man and try to churn the ocean of, the ocean and get the nectar of immortality all by itself. But this myth tells us, no. It's only when the primal nature and the divine nature come together for the task that one can have liberation. Okay, and we see this in old religions. We see this this concept left over in a lot of the old religions, in Norse mythology, in the old Norse mythology, in Celtic myths, in old Druidic type ideas, that it's the coming together of the primal with the divine that gives that can actually give the spiritual bliss. If the primal side of us is ignored, and one just tries to approach spirituality through the devas, the divine, they cannot get the nectar of immortality. We need that nectar of immortality. Now, even when the devas and the asuras, the primal and divine nature, were working together toward that task of having the spiritual bliss of the nectar of immortality, which Vishnu has promised only the devas are going to get. Okay, only the devas are going to get it. They still needed Saturn's help. They still needed the Kurma avatar, the turtle, to help them. They weren't strong enough to raise that mountain all by themselves and turn it and turn it and turn it. They needed the help of Kurma. Okay? What that means is, without that detachment of Saturn, we can't do it. When these two natures come together, primal and divine, we still have to have that healthy detachment in order to reach the nectar of immortality. So it's a balance between focusing the primal and divine natures towards a common goal with a healthy sense of detachment, and that equals patience, with Saturn qualities that allows us to actually churn the ocean of consciousness, churn the ocean of our lives, and get the nectar of immortality. We'll get back to this concept a little bit, but keep that in mind. The devas needed the asuras. Vishnu didn't just say, hey, just go churn the ocean and get the nectar of immortality. They go, no, you got to make a peace pact with the asuras. So there's a time in our lives where a person has to make a pact between their divine and primal sides, where they understand themselves enough, they understand their divinity enough and their primal nature enough, that they can yoke those two guys together in such a way that they can work towards a common goal. Because it takes all of our strength, all of our energy to do that. If we don't use our primal energy, we won't have the power, the strength to reach the nectar of immortality. The divine side needs to be fueled, we can say, by that primal side. The asuras helped fuel the efforts of the devas. Okay? So, they're churning that ocean. Finally, the nectar of immortality pops up. And the minute it pops up, the asuras grab it and run off. And the devas are like, wait a minute, we were supposed to get the nectar of immortality. Okay? And the asuras had agreed to give the devas the nectar of immortality. They could have everything else, but they're asuras, right? When they saw that nectar, their primal nature took over, and they're like, yeah, I know I promised, but I just got to have this. So they ran off with it. Okay? It's like, that's the nature of the primal nature. It overcomes all consciousness, all promises that we've made, all commitments we've made, and causes us to rush into something. And that's what happened with these asuras. They had promised the devas the nectar in exchange for everything else. They got everything else, but when they saw that nectar, their need for it was so great. They had to have it. They didn't care what. So they grabbed it and ran off. So the devas start complaining to Vishnu. Vishnu says, didn't I promise you guys that you would get the nectar? Don't sweat it. So Vishnu goes over to the asuras, and shifts into the Mohini avatar, which Mohini was the most beautiful woman to ever have walked upon earth, okay? Or the heavens. So she was just this perfect, perfect, perfect beauty. And she was an incarnation of Vishnu, so she was able to create that perfect beauty because she really wasn't born of flesh and blood. So she goes over to the asuras. And the asuras, by now, are fighting amongst themselves of who gets the first drink. Now they're all worried there's not enough for everyone, and they all want to make sure they get to drink it, and they all want to become immortal, so they're fighting amongst themselves. And she shows up, and she's, she winks and smiles and shows her cleavage and does whatever, till all these asuras all of a sudden have forgotten about this nectar of immortality, and all they have is eyes for her. They're just totally in love with her. She has just wooed all these asuras. And she goes, I'll tell you what, don't fight amongst yourself. I will hand out the nectar of immortality. And she had done such a good job charming each and every one of the asuras, that each and every one of the asuras felt like Mohini loved him the most. So they were all sure that if they said, sure, you dole out the nectar of immortality, they all thought Mohini would choose him first. Okay? So she really charmed these guys. There's only an incarnation of Vishnu can do. So, Mohini told all the Devas to line up here, and told all the asuras to line up here. By that time the Devas had caught up to Mohini and they were all together again. And so, Mohini goes by the lines, and she's flirting and charming and, using all of her curves and everything she has to make the asuras just be in awe of her and forget about the nectar of immortality. While she's doing that, she's pouring little drops of nectar of immortality in the mouths of the Devas. So the Devas are getting the nectar, the asuras aren't. But there was one asura, his name was Swarbarnu, and he he noticed what was going on. He was just a really crafty asura. So he got out of the asura line and kind of hid between the sun and the moon because the sun and moon are devas. He hid between the sun and the moon in the deva line. And so when it came to him, Vishnu put a drop in his mouth, and the minute that drop hit his mouth, he swallowed it, and right at that moment the sun and moon said, wait a minute, this isn't a deva, this is an asura. He's in the wrong line. And so Vishnu saw that and immediately took his Sudarshana chakra, threw it at him, cut this asura in half. Now what is the Sudarshana chakra? Like all things mythological, it's astronomical. Just like Mount Mandara is the North Pole, the Sudarshana chakra is the ecliptic. So here's the sun, here's the ecliptic, the path of the earth around the sun. That's the Sudarshana chakra. And here we have the earth, and here we have the moon rotating around the earth, with two intersection points to the ecliptic or Sudarshana chakra. And here we've got Rahu, and here we have Ketu. So Vishnu took the Sudarshana chakra, his ecliptic, sliced it through Swarbarnu, and now we have the north node, half of Swarbarnu, and the south node, the other half of Swarbarnu. Okay? And that's how Rahu and Ketu were formed. And at that point, so he threw that Sudarshana chakra, it split them into the heavens, because the Sudarshana chakra is part of the heavens. So all of a sudden Swarbarnu is cut in half, and he's up there in the sky. And he wasn't dead, because by then he'd already swallowed that one drop of nectar of immortality, so he became immortal, even though he was cut in half. Now, Vishnu always knows what he's doing, right? He doesn't get fooled by, somebody disguising themselves as a deva. But what happened is, Brahma had made a boon to Swarbarnu that he would become immortal. And so Vishnu allowed Swarbarnu to have that drop of nectar in order to fulfill the boon promised by Brahma. Okay? And so we were born Rahu and Ketu out of the churning of the ocean. And that was the only asura that achieved immortality. In fact, the boon was that Brahma gave Swarbarnu the boon that he would make him immortal and make him a graha. Okay? And so that's what happened. Rahu and Ketu became, Swarbarnu, as Rahu and Ketu, became a graha. Someone who can capture and seize man and drag us through the mud of our faith. Okay? So you see, only the devas got the nectar except for Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu have achieved the boon of Brahma to have the status of a deva, which is immortality. So Even though Rahu and Ketu are these evil things we think of them, they're born of demon. They're born of our primal side. They are, symbolically, they're divine agents. They are divine agents now. They are immortal, and they got a boon to become grahas. Okay? So they're as divine as are the other planets. Which means the things that Rahu and Ketu make us do in life are as important to our existence, and not I won't say existence because they can be destructive, but are as important to our growth in life, as important to the growth of our consciousness as anything else any of the other planets can do. People always say, oh, Jupiter is the one helping you spiritually. Well, if Rahu is dragging you through the mud and ruining your whole life, that's what your consciousness needs to grow. Now, Rahu and Ketu are immortal. Okay? Our consciousness is immortal. The path our consciousness is traveling takes many, many lifetimes to reach the end. So yeah, Rahu and Ketu may well ruin your life this lifetime. They might give you VD and kill you. They may cause you to ruin your whole life for some foolish reason. Okay? But in the long term, of lifetime to lifetime, in the long term of how an immortal sees something, as Rahu and Ketu see something, everything Rahu and Ketu are necessary for the growth of our consciousness, which is a process of lifetimes. But in our short little lifetime of one memory, it can seem like the destruction of a life. And so sometimes Rahu and Ketu will destroy a life. But they never destroy the consciousness, the goal of the consciousness, which is to achieve that nectar of immortality and have liberation. It's just in the context of our one life, it can seem ruinous. But they're immortals. They're not just thinking one lifetime at a time. They're thinking long term here. So, wherever Rahu and Ketu are, you never want to be critical. You never want to be blaming. You want to be understanding and provide as much knowledge about that thing as you can so they can understand that Rahu and Ketu placement. It's so easy to get judgmental. Oh, you know, he had Rahu-Venus conjunction. He's a sex maniac, ruined his whole life for sex and got on drugs and finally just drank himself to death. All right, yeah, Rahu did that because it was conjunct Venus in a bad house and it was aspected by a badly dignified Saturn. That still doesn't mean it was bad or a waste of the life. In the long haul of the path of that soul's consciousness, from lifetime to lifetime, that was a very necessary lifetime. So we always want to have acceptance and compassion where we see Rahu and Ketu, even though we're going to see some of the craziest stories about what's going on there. Okay, so now we've got Rahu and Ketu being born out of this ocean, of churning this ocean through the help of Saturn. What that shows is that for Rahu and Ketu to deal with them effectively, what really helps in our lives is a good, solid Saturn. Saturn gives us the perseverance, the strength, the humility, the capacity for self-acceptance when we do stupid things, which is part of humility, to deal with Rahu and Ketu. So right away, if you've seen a chart that Saturn's really weak, it's in bad dignity in every Varga, for instance, we know right away that person's going to struggle way more with Rahu and Ketu. Getting that nectar of immortality is going to be so much harder for them. Okay? Because they don't have that detachment that Saturn gives, and that ability to persevere and suffer. Saturn gives the ability to suffer and to get up again and suffer more. So let's take a woman who's got Rahu in the 7th house, let's say. So the path of her consciousness is going to grow along the path of relationships. So let's say she has a really weak Saturn. She has one relationship, she learns a few things, gets a broken heart, and is traumatized the rest of her life to where she's scared to ever have a relationship again. Because Saturn's so weak. But if Saturn's really strong in her chart, then sure, she has that first relationship, it hurts like hell, she gets some trauma, but she still has the strength to go into another relationship, and as a result learn a little more about Rahu in the 7th house, and then another one and learn a little bit more. So Saturn helps Rahu and Ketu persevere along that journey, wherever it may be. When you see charts where people get killed by Rahu or Ketu and their Saturn's weak, you'll just see them give up a big part of their enthusiasm for that area of life and maybe give up all their enthusiasm. So a strong Saturn really helps right away with dealing with the shit that Rahu and Ketu are going to give you, especially the trouble that Rahu is going to give you. Rahu gets more help from Saturn, but both of them will benefit from that. Okay. Oh yeah, a couple other things I want to mention. One thing I forgot to mention during the myth. When they were churning that ocean, the Asuras were holding the head of the snake and the Devas were holding the tail of the snake. The snake, he was getting pulled and jerked on and throttled, so he started coughing and hacking, and all this poisonous smoke spilled out of his mouth. He coughed up all this poisonous smoke right on to the Asuras. And so a lot of the Asuras fell over dead, and the other ones were feeling weak and queasy for a while. And so that's symbolizes a lot of our primal nature, okay? That unplanned or that unthought idea that this is what's really best, jumping into something without thinking it through. Think about it. Would you rather be holding the head of the snake or the tail of the snake, right? It's a no-brainer. You're a lot safer at the back of the snake, okay? So these Asuras, they couldn't see it that way. Okay, they just jumped into something without thinking about it. They thought it would be best. As a result, a lot of them got hurt. And that's what happens in ourselves. Our primal side jumps into things. It gets that primal need, throws us into something, and oftentimes gets hurt very badly. It doesn't have the fulfillment it completely expects. And so that primal side, even before achieving the goal of getting the nectar of immortality, suffers disappointment. So, how does that reflect astrologically or in real life? Well, let's say you got someone lonely. They're so lonely. So they have such a craving and need to be with somebody. So they go and be with that person because that need is a primal thing. They are going to suffer. In that, when they get together with that person that they needed so much, they're going to suffer. And that's why people who have the healthiest relationships are the people who need the relationship the least, which means they have the least primal need for it. They're in their relationship because they truly love and enjoy that person they're with. They like that person. But the person who has the need for that person is going to suffer. And so that's how these Asuras work. That those primal desires we have, the primal needs we have, jump into things without proper forethought and get hurt always and disappointed. And that's just that's the nature of our primal needs. And so our primal side is always going to suffer disappointment along the way. Okay, meaning as it churned the ocean, the Asuras were disappointed because they got poisoned by the snake. They hurt, they suffered, worse than disappointed. When they finally got the nectar of immortality, or when they had their hands on it, they lost it and it went to the Devas in the first place. They went to the Devas. So the Asuras never have the goal fulfilled either. So the Asuras are not going to be happy. Your primal side is not going to be satisfied. It's going to get hurt along the way. And it's not going to get the nectar of immortality. It's not going to get satisfied. All that longings you have, all the loneliness you want to fulfill, it's going to get hurt and it's not going to be satisfied. Okay? But what will happen if it's harnessed and works together with the Devas, which means if the Devas let the Asuras come along for the ride, the consciousness will get the nectar of immortality, and the consciousness will enjoy bliss, and Rahu and Ketu, the most important Asuras of them all. In fact, one of Rahu's name is Asura, like the Asura. Okay? So Rahu is the Asura because he's the immortal one. Okay? They will get their peace and contentment too. They will get their immortality too. As we can almost say, a side effect of the Devas getting theirs. Because again, this Asura went until the Deva line. And since the Devas got it, he got it. Okay? So, there is a part of the primal side, that Asura nature, that will have that satisfaction enough to make the journey worthwhile for the asuras. Okay? And the consciousness of a whole, the divine side of us, which is the immortal side, gets the full taste of the immortality and satisfies that primal nature of the asura, symbolized by Rahu actually too. So we have to work together. The primal side, when we want to master Rahu and Ketu, and a person wants to create fulfillment where they are, that's the path really of liberation. That needs to be done by harnessing the efforts of the asuras, our primal side, with the efforts of our divine side. So that those sides are working together, not at war with each other, not ignoring each other, not pretending the other one doesn't exist. And when they work together towards a goal, which means everything that we let the primal side do has as it the goal of helping us achieve the nectar of immortality, with the full blessings and appreciation of our divine, wisdom-centered side, then a person makes a lot of rapid progress down the path of Rahu and Ketu and will achieve the nectar of immortality. And until that process happens, you just won't. Okay, these guys got to work together. So as we talk more about Rahu and Ketu, we'll probably bring up this myth a little bit more. But you can see they're very complex, and there's a lot of symbolism in that myth. You can read that myth. I have it in Graha Sutras. You can also read that myth in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which has the myth of all the different avatars that were related to the planets. And they're all really important things to understand, because these are the foundational aspects of Rahu and Ketu. These are the bottom line qualities. So what do we know about Rahu and Ketu? It has to be worked out on planet Earth. It can only be achieved by harmonizing our primal and divine sides towards a common goal. Okay? It's going to take time, right? Okay? We need the Saturn detachment and perseverance and strength to achieve the goal of Rahu. Okay? We can't be too sensitive. We can't take things too personally. We have to be willing to be humiliated. We have to be willing to look stupid. Okay? We have to be willing to let our primal side suffer unrequited desires by working towards a common goal with the Devas. So study this myth. And now I believe we'll be ready to actually talk about Rahu and Ketu in, practically speaking, in horoscopes, what it's making you do, what you need to learn, what its dashas are going to give, if the dasha is going to be good or bad, and what it's going to give. So we're going to cover all that in the next series of classes, all about Rahu and Ketu. And then top off with using Rahu and Ketu in compatibility, where they have some real interesting uses.